Well. Here we go. More than 1 year after starting my analysis of the Ori franchise, which had marked the beginning of this YouTube channel, 2 videos analyzing, for the first one, the world of Ori, the forests of Nibel and Naywen, their splendor, their excess, their aestheticized decline, this union between nature and spirituality, in the image of its hero, who was at the heart of my second video. A small spirit, raised with all the humanity of their mother Naru in an adventure putting the spotlight on family by multiple aspects, a family for which, twice, Ori confronts the spirituality they know very little about because they were kept away from it since birth, accepting it to the point of sacrificing themselves to allow this family, their human connections, to live in the forests. But I didn't talk much about the music. I had focused on the combat tutorial from Ori and the Blind Forest, the way it announced the specific color of the score, but also the cathartic aspect of combat, extremely liberating in the first opus, and then on the opening sequence in Inkwater Marsh, particularly the scene when Ori gets the Spirit Blade. I had also spoken a little about the Wellspring Glades, but nothing else. So it's now time to analyze the score of both Ori games. The whole score. It's endless. To make it easier to digest, I've divided this huge rambling into several videos, each one corresponding to a part of the script. In this video, I will analyze the music of both prologues, as well as briefly present what they announce in the themes of the music and how it will be used, elements that I will develop in each of the following videos. The second video will be dedicated to nature, how it is expressed musically and how the world allows Ori to apprehend their spirituality in a playful way, with a focus on the first dungeon, the Jinzu Tree. In the third one, I will evoke the 2 main genres in the Ori franchise, the merveilleux, completed in the second opus by some aspects of the fantastique, illustrated notably by Mildwood Depths. Then a long video about the musical loops and how the OST manages to go beyond the notion of loop in a quite varied way, ending with the analysis of the Wellspring dungeon. The 5th video will be dealing with narration, and I will end with another long video on leitmotifs, with the analysis of the main pieces associated with Ori, Ku, Quolock, Mora, Shriek, to conclude on the epilogue of Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Good luck. Ori's soundtrack opens with a voice, a small motif in D major as if hummed, mouth closed, rather organic, emerging from the D of the orchestra to merge again with it later, underlined by a more concrete percussion effect. We are told a story of spirits, a story of light, a spectacular story which, however, largely focuses on motherhood, that of Naru, that of Kuro. All of this is introduced in 1 minute. A piano motif with a quiet rhythm, a slow dactyl, a very soft sound and a simple, soothing counterpoint is immediately covered by a more imposing orchestra with the brass instruments already present. It's the storm. This storm, despite its announcing quite a lot of troubles, is also the day of Ori's birth. It's the first contact we have with the genre of the merveilleux in the story, and the dark tones of the strings and brass make way for the woodwinds, first the clarinet in transition, then the very rhythmic flutes in the high register. Ori appears on the screen. There's still just a leaf, something organic. voice returns, the melody asserts itself, but it still uses only slightly changing vowels. There is thus no attack, everything's very bland, and it sounds like several voices answer each other. It's the same voice, however, when the vowel changes, the tone changes too. The presence of the piano, then another instrument, in homorhythm gives more body to this melody, enriching the texture and the attacks. This melody is also supported by an extremely soft ostinato, a recurrent element in Ori soundtrack, where the plucked strings again allow to hear light contrast, always by the presence of attacks, while the rather low and warm strings complete the counterpoint. However, Ori has an instrument, the oboe, then the English horn. This one emerges from a now absolutely translucent orchestra, still supported by the piano, before the gameplay finally begins. We remain in the softness with the harp. The strings are always a little in the background, giving just a little warmth to Swallow's Nest. This warmth that is perhaps lacking to Naru, whom we know is extremely lonely, without any family since her father's death, and for whom Ori is going to be a gift. This scene is called The Gift in the audio files, an unexpected child. Precisely in the piano, then the oboe, the main theme of the work is going to appear. Ori being ultimately little surrounded in the majority of their adventure, I tend to associate almost all the musical elements to the small spirit. This theme, however, could be the theme of Ori seen from the mother's point of view. It is a very simple theme, easy to sing, that we precisely hear sung in the menu loop, which could illustrate a lullaby sung by Naru. Remember that the official image chosen for Ori in the Blind Forest celebrates motherhood as a smiling Naru rocks Ori, peacefully sleeping in her arms. The light crescendo at the end of the intervention of the oboe underlines that it is the instrument of Ori. Everything is extremely soft. The sound of the piano octaves, the phrasing of the oboe, when comes the moment of the birth, the materialization of the small hero, the incredulity, the tension, which falls completely when Naru takes her child in her arms. Forming a loop with the opening, the vocal motif in D major, we conclude with the D major chord, while in between everything was in D minor, but never dark thanks to the orchestration, the reminiscence of this opening in D major, and the magnificent vocal line sung by Eerily Brighton. Everything is very fluid and very open. This makes it possible to announce what's coming next. The keys are well used to imply the moments of continuity or rupture. For the moment, we will remain in closely related keys, parallel keys like D minor and D major, and close keys like D major and B minor, which forms a coherent whole. The instrumentation will also be used to make transitions between the different moments. The softness of the last scene is thus taken again as Ori wakes up. Inside, all is soft, calm, comfortable, but as we go out, we finally discover Nibble by day, its abundance, the brightness and the vibrancy of its color palette. One also discovers Ori, their character, their intense relationship with Naru in Swallow's Nest. This idyllic vision is introduced by a joyful scale leading to a recorder solo. The chosen sounds are extremely clear, the solo recorder in particular, used in the second opus for Coup. The piano, here in its medium register, therefore also rather clear, but with body. It's not a matter of fragility nor even softness. Here it's the plenitude of Swallow's Nest that is celebrated, and the female choir discreet. We find this use of an ostinato in 16th note sextuplets, which is discreet but supports the already intoxicating character of the music, accentuated by its ternary cyclical rhythm, and the pits on the double bass, discreetly bouncing. If Hjoth is translated by a bright recorder, Ori's oboe asserts itself at the end of the phrase, after the clarinet. The second part of the music, when the building of the bridge begins, education, learning, is downright stunning. As an instrumentalist, I find the melody particularly well constructed to give it direction, great strength. First the broken arpeggio to anchor it well, then the repetition of the short ascending motif, for example. It is very beautiful to phrase, it's just so easy to play. But the night falls and Ori is going to be confronted, yet briefly, to their spirituality. The instrumentation of the previous scene easily illustrated the heavenly beauty of the forest, the abundance of the colors, the elements, but insisted more on the natural character of the place, through the woods, the percussion. Until then, the element which translated the most Ori's spirituality was their sound design, when they flew under the storm. The instrumentation emphasized the genre of the merveilleux in the forest, but the fast humanization of Ori, Naru treats them as a child and their learning is focused on construction, there is no magic, Naru probably did not mention Ori's spirit nature to them, was such that the focus was on nature. However, the spirit tree has lost one of his children and is calling them tonight. The transition with the daytime music is very fluid, it's very fast without brutality, and immediately very organic and even mysterious elements appear, without invading the sound design so particular of the spirit light. I had spoken about it at length in my first videos, this mix of strangeness and organicity. We will hear breathing effects, the spirit tree seems to breathe out Saint's light, and especially this glissandi that seem to call Ori without overpowering the nocturnal and magical atmosphere, while the hero brings the harvest back to the nest. The theme is still there in a slightly more hushed version. However, the spirit light is ambivalent because if it is related to Ori and is thus part of them, it is capable of the worst, responsible for the death of Kuro's children, then the owl herself. It is powerful. I had also explained that there was for Naru the fear of losing Ori, her miracle child, in a now very solitary life. The spirit light, in any case spectacular, is thus felt in several ways and the calls gain in power. It is a desperate cry of the tree turning almost into a threat, from Naru's point of view at least, and the players perhaps, a threat that is short-lived because she hides Ori. It is her child. They find themselves completely alone. The motif that accompanied Ori's birth is used again and will conclude each moment of this prologue. Birth, isolation, death. It is often heard in moments of expectation, of tension, positive or negative, hope or fear. Here on the screen, a fade-in illustrates the inexorability of the passage of time and consequently the arrival of famine. On On the second day, the second time rather, there is a break in the key, B flat minor. It's not a close key, it is very far from the eternal atmosphere until now. The forest is dead. The music is thus adorned with a funereal tone, and another thematic element appears, that of the forest of its decline. It is played on the piano, however, if its tone is always soft, the piano sounds broken. Naru is exhausted, but Ori will always incarnate a form of hope which will be systematically translated in the music by the return of the pulse of the ostinato, what we already heard several times, but here more intense, like a motor return to life, a reborn hope, whether by what Ori does, as when they are agile enough to recover the last fruits in a very long moment of tension before Naru's death, or by what they instill, the hope they represent through their spectacular rebirth thanks to the spirit tree. Life starts again, music too. Naru is dead, Ori leaves Swallow's Nest only to pass away in their turn a few moments later. But hope takes a spectacular turn, the tremolos in the strings give a lot of substance to the sound. The theme of the forest is suddenly reborn at the same time as the forest itself, blooming again a field of flowers up to the spirit tree, stating the main theme to finally close the prologue on intense ascending motions. The forest is blinded, but not without hope from now. The score of Ori and the Will of the Wisps doesn't have the same color as the one of the first opus. The emotions at stake are not the same, Ori having now this new attachment, their little sister, coming with a form of responsibility, but who also knows how to face those who attack Ori. As there is no interruption between the menu screen and the beginning of the cutscene, the music is also adapted. It announces the warmth of the scene. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is going to explore other things that Ori's spirituality, so will the music. I'll come back to the main theme itself in the last video of this long analysis dedicated to the characters' themes, but we can, however, briefly compare the two orchestrations. The first version, the Blind Forest one, is higher, more active too. The piano starts with generous arpeggios, to the point that the tempo feels faster, even though it's about the same. We are immediately caught in the lyricism of the voice because it appears from the beginning of the piece. The second version, on the contrary, takes a little time. There is a small ostinato as an introduction, which brings the voice with more softness and warmth. It is vocally much more intimate. Ori and the Blind Forest began with a loss, several losses even. Ori and the Will of the Wisps opens on a birth. We can also already hear the distinctive color of the strings, a warmth even when the music shows some restraint. It's very beautiful. New character, new theme. The flute, or the whistle, I guess, something similar, becomes the support of the Little Owl's leitmotif, appearing with a certain clarity. It's even bursting in the image of Ku's birth, and it develops at the same time as the owl grows up alongside her family. The two prologues are about the same length, but the second one lingers for a longer time on the family. For once, nobody dies. Time flows more clearly, it is marked by the succession of seasons, and we clearly see Ku growing up through typical scenes of childhood, but important to show the place of Ku in her family and her aspirations. The music will therefore, much more than in the first prologue, be descriptive, accompanying some of Ku's actions as well as her state of mind, such as the small descending element when Ku's first flight turns out to be complicated. Ku's theme returns faster, she's growing, and it's coupled with one of the themes from the first prologue, the harvest theme or the childhood theme, perhaps in reference to the fruit that everyone eats, everyone but Ku. It is very amusing that her instrument disappears while she's worried about her meal. To be back just when the solution is found, brighter just as the trunk appears, synonymous with slugs. A short dialogue will then take place between the piano and the recorder. Without the image, it reminded me of a way to evoke a kind of learning. Ku, who would learn to speak, for example, and would try to repeat what the piano tells her. But given the scene, it's rather Ku who asserts her identity. No pitches for owls, that's how it is, before a tutti. The whole family plays in winter. This is a new theme that will be featured in several areas of Naiwen, notably Le Maples and the windswept wastes, also in the cutscene where Ku is lost in the silent woods or when Ori is looking for her. Ku grows up, but she still can't fly. When it comes to the characters, apart from Ori, the systematic use of their leitmotif, when they have one, can give very specific effects. In the fight against Quorok, for example, that we will see in the last video, it seems that the whole forest is overcome by fear. Here, hearing Ku's theme while she looks sadly at the other birds flying away is very poignant. Hearing this motif that defines her entirely musically, as she witnesses something that seems denied to her at the moment, that is part of her nature as a bird, and that undoubtedly brings her back to the death of her mother and siblings, is very powerful, and it emphasizes the talent of the instrumentalist. The emotion comes directly through them. For the moment, something is totally absent from this prologue, what I called earlier the merveilleux. The Ori franchise emphasizes two genres in its overall art direction, the merveilleux and the fantastic. Yes, there is a video dedicated to genres. In the first prologue, the merveilleux was there to translate the spirituality but also the wonder of Naru in front of the incredible gifts that seemed to be given to her. The second prologue does not evoke spirituality at all. Ori has returned to their family. They don't live with the other spirits as we had seen at the end of the first game. Ori looks at the other spirits but remains apart, waiting for Ku's birth. And Ku has no link with the spirit light. The score, like later on in Naiwen's Forest, is more focused on this opposition between the warmth of very realistic feelings and the fantastic brought by the decline of Naiwen and its threat, Shriek. However, in the next scene from the prologue, at nightfall, the instrumentation wants to be more magical. It is not necessarily related to the genre of the merveilleux, but to the softness of this night and the hope that Ori is going to bring to their sister, the light to be able to fly at last with her mother's feather. The two nights, the one from the first prologue, the night of the light ceremony, and the one from the second are besides very different. The first one was a night of revelations, the spiritual nature of Ori, thus reintroduced its sound markers, positive or negative. This one is more intimate. It is the night of an owl who lost her mother, but is going to be able to finally fly thanks to a part of Kuro, and with Ori, this softness also illustrates the relation between the two siblings. After Gumo has attached Kuro's feather on Ku's wing, with of course some pits when Gumo wakes up with a start and a more concrete piano when the latter repairs Ku's wing, the hope to fly is getting closer, it's finally time for the first flight. Both siblings fly together. I like very much the small head gesture that Ku makes as soon as the feather is attached, looking at Ori. It's instantaneous. As soon as she sees that she can fly, she looks at Ori and with a gesture invites them to fly with her. So we hear Ku's leitmotif, but it is immediately connected to the main theme, rather linked to Ori in my opinion. Ori can show Ku their father, the spirit tree, and we hear Saint's sound design, then the whole forest. but it is most of all the first flight of Ku, and her theme is stated again in a moment of great plenitude with the voice and the flute. The main theme comes back just when we see the summit of Sorrow Pass connected to Ori's adventure. The flute comes back alone when Ku carefully starts following the birds in migration, perhaps. But a new color will be revealed as the storm begins and the spirit willow appears. It was perhaps a little long for a first flight, Ku. The fantastic with which we discover the thematic of Ori and the Will-o'-the-Wisp antagonists, which suddenly comes to lock the music, dragging the two characters down in Neiwen. At the end of each prologue, we have already learned all the key elements of the music. We know what will be developed in the game itself. All aspects of nature are explored, its abundance, its decline, its spirituality, the emotions associated with it, the joy of a childhood lived in Swallow's Nest, the fear of what it can do to us or make us lose, but also the strange attraction that Ori can feel towards it. The prologues also highlight each one a genre, which will add a specific color to the score. The first, by the awakening of spirituality, the introduction of the elements of the tale, would be rather associated with the merveilleux. In the second, at the very end, it is a darker genre, the fantastic, at least some of its aspects, that will stand out. The length and the structure of the prologues also introduce several characteristics of the narrative. These prologues are not necessarily short, but they are condensed. Everything happens very quickly, everything is very versatile. We will see how this versatility is heard in the music and, more generally, the elements that allow a clear narrative. Finally, the prologues each make us hear several motifs, leitmotifs, which will cross the two scores, accompanied by new ones, appearing as the forest, especially Neiwen, is explored. Of course, we can associate them either to characters, Ku or Quolock for instance, which is perhaps the most classical. For Ori already it is a little more complicated because several thematic elements seem to be associated to them, some clearly melodic, others rather introductory. Among the melodic motifs, however, I tend to feel that each one is associated with a facet of Ori. They have multiple attachments, they're a spirit, raised as a child in the abundance of Swallow's Nest. Each of these aspects seems translated by a specific motif. However, this would be reductive. Ori's score is extremely concentrated on all these motifs. It calls upon them almost permanently, sometimes repeating them obsessively, which will have a rather particular effect for me in the case of character leitmotifs, but I'll come back to that in the last video. And it seems to me that their choice is not only related to the situation on the screen, but quite simply, to their intrinsic rhythmic and melodic material, which will lend itself more easily to specific emotions. Sometimes even this leitmotif seems to be shared, like Shriek's theme that surprisingly haunts Willow's End. She is not responsible for the decline or the decay, but she bears its traces. The analysis of the prologues is finished. In the following video, I will discuss the different ways to express the importance of nature, its elements and its spirituality that Ori will have to accept. I'll publish it as soon as it is done. In the meantime, thanks for watching and goodbye.